my computer.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Just a second. I'm trying to see whether there's a way. Okay, so it's really a great joy to welcome a friend in our club. And as you know already, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, this is an interesting exercise. So most of us are Romanians, Eastern Europeans, but some of us are Romanians living abroad. We have lots of members who actually happen to live either in California, Arizona, Texas, or Seattle, that is Washington State. And tonight, and of course in California this morning, we have a special guest in the person of Daniel Druhora. Now we try to be always on time. My name is Mihail George Namțu, so I must be always paying attention to Pünktlichkeit. So we'll be on time, ladies and gentlemen, every Monday evening, 7:30, we begin our Gold International meetings. Tonight, as I said, it's a great joy to welcome a friend. He was born in Romania, and he survived, I think, the most dreadful period of Ceausescu's dictatorship, the late 80s. He was, I think, 11 years old when he saw the collapse of communism. He even participated in some rituals. Okay, so we'll try to pause the microphone for everybody.
Un interview.
I'm sorry, we have to pause the microphone.
Microphone?
Anyway, so coming back to our guest, as I said, he was born in Transylvania. He left Romania when he was 11, together with his family, with his father, who is a great theologian of evangelical persuasion. Daniel studied in the US, and he became an associate professor at the University of Southern California. He was always interested in theology, culture, and cinematography. And he is also, can I say this, associate pastor, if I'm not mistaken. He's involved in basically growing up a new generation of Christians in California. But at the same time, he's a wonderful, wonderful father of 3, I believe, and of course, a great husband. He is more than welcome to talk tonight about René Girard, the great French philosopher and anthropologist. Thankfully, we have seen the works of Girard being translated into Romanian, beginning with the early 90s. René Girard was, of course, a French philosopher born in 1923. He was young enough to see the horrors of the Holocaust and the occupation of France by the Nazi Germany in the mid-40s. He then graduated, I think, the École Nationale de Chartres and specialized in medieval studies. He emigrated to America, pursuing a doctorate at Indiana University. He taught at different institutions like State University of New York, Johns Hopkins, and Stanford until his retirement in 1995. Most of us know him as a wonderful, excellent exegete of great novelists such as Cervantes, Stendhal, Flaubert, Dostoevsky, and Proust. I had a revelation by reading his first book, Mensonges romantiques et vérités romanesques, written in 1961. And then later on, he became interested in mythological and religious texts. As you, I believe, all know, he became a practicing Christian after he discovered the characters of Dostoevsky, and he underwent a kind of religious conversion to Christianity. The Scapegoat, the book we are going to discuss today, is a revealing document showing how violence and the sacred appear in ancient societies, but modern societies as well. In order to find out more about René Girard, as I said, we are more than happy to have Daniel Druhora with us. He will give his talk right now. Thank you. The floor is yours, Daniel.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's presence here today, and I welcome you from my home in Southern California, where it's always 70 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And so much so that I think it often becomes depressing and you miss the falling leaves of Cluj and the snowflakes of December and January of Romania. So because we are speaking about Girard, who has coined the term mimetic rivalry and mimetic desire, I know some people desire the beaches of California. When you're here, you desire the mountains of Transylvania, and you long for those. So I am pleased to be here with you today, and to talk about a writer and a thinker, a philosopher who has greatly influenced my work and the way I view my own life. This is all also about practical applications as well. Girard is someone who isn't just merely theoretical, and a lot of his theories and thoughts can be applied to our daily lives, which is what makes him an extraordinary thinker of the 20th and even 21st centuries. I'm going to look at him through two lenses. One, and they're both related to my own background, because I came, as Mihai said, I came from Romania at a very young age, 11 years of age, and I was very drawn to geopolitics, and I was very drawn to the art of diplomacy. I was, for a long time, a careful student of Kissinger, also Holbrooke and others, and to look at how diplomacy is shaping the world, how conflict is resolved. I was very much interested in conflict, how it arises, how it's resolved. I got my undergraduate degree in international relations from the University of Washington in Seattle. But then I realized something more profound, and that's that you can actually shape the world with a story in a way that you can't with diplomacy, in a more profound way. So I went into filmmaking. One of my early mentors in film was a Jewish writer by the name of Stuart Stern, who wrote Rebel Without a Cause, the classic Hollywood film, who mentored me for a couple of years and put me on this path toward filmmaking. I then came to the University of Southern California, where I received my Master of Fine Arts in Film and Television Production, and have been making films, writing scripts, and developing films for a couple of studios, but also directing my own documentary films. I'm very much interested in real life. I think, as they say, truth is stranger than fiction. I'm very much interested in stories that are based on real life. And I often turn to Girard to make sense of the stories that I'm telling. So I'll be looking at him maybe through these two lenses, and the book, The Scapegoat, through the lens of cinema and story, but also through the lens of geopolitics and what is happening in the world. I'm going to share my screen now and begin with a quote from René Girard. And Mihai, please interrupt. What I would like is rather than this to be a lecture, I would like it to be a conversation and a dialogue. I think Girard is one that provokes these types of conversations. So I don't mind if I get interrupted or if we start to ask questions. I think it's the best way to talk about Girard.
Okay.
So there is no culture without a tomb, and no tomb without a culture. In the end, the tomb is the first and only cultural symbol. Sorry. The above, let's see, let's move I can see it. Oh. The above ground tomb does not have to be invented. It is the pile of stones in which the victim of the unanimous stoning is buried. It is the first pyramid. So what Girard is doing here is introducing us to, in more ways than one, to his lens, which he sees the world, and that's basically that every society was founded on a myth, and every myth has at its core a foundational murder, a foundational victim, a foundational violence that is, as he says, unanimous, meaning that a collective violence that has happened against an individual or a group, and that upon this violence, upon this myth, society is built. To understand Girard, we have to do some. We have to look at two major themes that form his metic theory. And
before that,
before
you say that, I'm sorry, just to clarify this first point, because we are Romanians, and of course the kind of general narrative we are told is that we had a great hero, Decebalus, okay, the leader of the Dacians, who committed suicide, who got killed somehow, but in fact committed suicide because of the attempt of the Romans to conquer our beloved land. So that's the tomb of Decebal, the unknown tomb of Decebal in Sarmisegetuza. Then you have the Romans themselves claiming that it's the death of that noble woman Lucretia, okay, the rape of Lucretia. She was a very honorable woman who was raped by the famous Tarquini, and so the near death of this woman led to an attempt on behalf of the Romans to basically annihilate any attempt to have a monarchy installed in Rome. Then you have Romulus and Remus, the story of the two brothers, and so on and so forth. So it's very telling that he says that all cultures have a kind of necropolis, yes, built around them. And
exactly.
It's shocking. It's not just with the Egyptians, but it's also with the Europeans in many, many ways. Not to mention that Christianity is putting the empty tomb at the heart of the narrative. So please go on.
Yes. So how does this happen? And I mean, there are a lot of ways that we can unpack Girard, but I would like to just stick, because of the time that we have, to stick to two major concepts, and that's the mimetic desire and the scapegoat mechanism. And of course, our focus today is on the scapegoat and scapegoating. Mimetic desire is basically, let me describe, this is off, because I also mentioned Remulus and Romus, very closely connected to biblical foundational stories. For example, the first murder, right? Cain and Abel, as you see depicted here. All of them have at the root this idea of mimetic rivalry and mimetic desire. Basically, it's humans want something more because other humans wanted. So this is against the Freudian concept of something that is automatic to humans, that is intrinsic to humans, but rather we want something because other human beings wanted, which makes other people wanted, and then that leads to crisis, to inevitable conflict. So whereas Freud wants to rationalize desire, Girard says that the desire is irrational, really. It's I want what you want, but not necessarily because that thing is desirable. I desire your desire. And that is imitated. Humans obviously learn, we are intensely mimetic. We learn by imitation, we talk, we walk, nearly everything we do, even as children, we learn by imitating. But because we imitate each other's desires, we tend to become rivals with other people because we compete for the same things. This is another quote from Girard. Man is the creature who does not know what to desire, and he turns to others in order to make up his mind. We desire what others desire because we imitate their desires. I think it's worth to stop here and I would like to ask the audience, what do they think about this? Do you think this is true? From what you know about your own life and your own experiences?
Especially in the realm of marketing. Who wants to?
Yeah, or maybe we can think about think about social media and the like button.
Absolutely. We want to get recognition from famous people. We are happy to be celebrated, to be recognized by the famous, and we are not paying that much attention when we are surrounded by simple people. And that mechanism, which leads to fame and celebrity production, is truly pernicious and shocking in a way, because you might have no intrinsic value, but just because of the proximity, because of the vicinity, the neighborhood in which you find yourself, you begin to have some value in the eyes of others. That's why people buy houses, buy clothes, and buy cars which are owned, which were owned initially by celebrities, and that's shocking. So capitalism, in a way, has indicated that Girard is very much right about this.
You know where Girard is right most of all, Mihai? It's in the relationship of teenage girls, between teenage girls. So, if you want to really look at mimetic desire or mimetic rivalry, look at teenage girls. They like the same things. They like the same fashion. So you have a group of girls, for example, that are grouping together, and they imitate each other, right? They wear similar designs. The problem comes when two teenage girls like the same boy, right? And everything is fine. Imitating and being part of the group and having a group identity is okay, until maybe you have two girls in the same group that like the same young man.
So erotic desire, that is sexual desire.
Yeah, but if they're competing for the same thing, where does rivalry come in? That's the question here. It's how is it okay if Mihai loves books and I want to mimic his desire, and I also want to like books because I like Mihai and I'd like to be his friend and I like his company, but I also like books and I mimic his desire. But what about if me and Mihai like the same thing, which is scarce, which there isn't enough of? Like maybe both Mihai and I like an original copy of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and we both want to go for it. And that's where rivalry comes in. That's where conflict comes in. And
I will let you win because you have more money.
I'll buy the book and give it to you as a gift. But what Girard is saying is that this conflict is multiplied. And how does this work in society? If it's at the individual level, I mean, you take presidential elections, for example, right? There's only one president at a time, and at the end there are two candidates that make the final cut, and they both want the same thing. And then they galvanize others. Okay, so now there's two groups against two groups, and it spreads to society, right? This conflict, this rivalry, this mimetic rivalry. What Girard says happens. It snowballs. It always has a snowballing effect. So it's not just between two people or between two groups. It always spreads. It's the miasma of violence, which she calls the miasma of violence. And how is this solved? And it's solved, in Girard's view, through the scapegoat mechanism. The war of all against all culminates in the war of all against one. So society gets together and says, look, we can't sustain this violence anymore, or this conflict between us. We have to find the culprit. We have to find someone who is responsible, someone who's to blame for this. And if we get rid of that person, the world is restored to order. So in a sense, the society and individuals and groups, what they're trying to do is have an answer to this diabolical power that creates society-wide chaos. And it's a thing that's generally impossible to do single-handedly. And that's where the scapegoat comes in. And through the death of the scapegoat, I mean, you look at at every and it's probably worthwhile to talk about sacrifice here as well. But the sacrificial victim, you know, of course, in the Old Testament and in other mythical traditions, there was always a need to sacrifice, whether it was an animal sacrifice, and in some societies, even human sacrifice. Someone had to die, blood had to be shed in order for the violence to stop. And that carries on through, obviously, even through the New Testament, and we see the ultimate scapegoat in the person of Jesus Christ and in Calvary. But this also brings the discussion on victimhood or victimism, and this idea of concern for victims, because Girard is saying that this is something that this cycle repeats itself all the time. What happens is once the scapegoat is sacrificed, there is a myth created around that scapegoat. So there is the mimetic rivalry, which leads to the snowballing effect, the purging of the violence the violence that comes upon a single victim or the scapegoat, and then the concern for the victims, which then creates more violence. So you create this myth of the victim, somebody that was scapegoated, somebody that becomes a hero now, somebody that has a myth that is built around them. I mean, some of us remember, I guess, even the death of the Ceausescus, and if you can remember, shortly thereafter, there were people that were actually crying for them and creating all sorts of myths around the dictator and his wife, and why they died and how they died, and whether or not they should have died. Some people even went to put flowers at their graveside and so on afterwards. It always happens that in Girard's interpretation, that the world creates these scapegoats and then mythologizes them to the statehood of hero and God and deity worship, and that creates in society an overly preoccupation with victimhood and victimization. So victimism uses the ideology of concern for victims to gain political or economic or spiritual power, and it's important to underline this spiritual power. It is not enough to have just political or economic. It has to be at the order of myth. It has to be imbued with spiritual characteristics.
Daniel, if you don't mind here to just butt in a bit, there is a very clear distinction in Girard between Christ, the innocent victim, and false victims of violence. When I say false victims, is because Julius Caesar, for instance, yes, he was a victim of the Republican Party led by Brutus, but he was not innocent. He was somebody who initially, when he was calling himself Dictator Perpetuo, he inflicted violence upon others, that is his enemies. So in a way, Christ is the ultimate scapegoat, but in a very profound theological sense, he is the Lamb, he's the Lamb of God. And we have to emphasize this purity of Christ-like victimhood in opposition to the tainted victimhood of those who just play the victim in order to receive some benefits. I just felt this is a very crucial distinction. Like, Christ was not George Floyd, to be very blunt. George Floyd was a victim of violence, police violence. But before he was a victim, he was also a perpetrator of violence. He was also a thug. Okay, so that distinction is very, very critical to my mind, and that's what gets to be neglected these days. Yeah,
I mean, it's the innocence of Jesus, I think, has to be underlined here, what you're saying. I mean, Girard wrote another seminal book called I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. And just to read a quick passage from there that exactly underlines what you just said. Jesus is innocent, writes Girard, and those who crucify him are guilty. John the Baptist is innocent, and those who have him decapitated are guilty. The continuity between the Jewish Bible and the New Testament is real and substantial. The refusal to follow, he refers to Marcion here, who wanted to separate the Gospels and the Hebrew Bible, is based on this continuity. Christian orthodoxy affirms that the two testaments are united as part of one and the same revelation. What is this revelation that he's speaking about? There is no prior demonization behind the divinity of Christ. Christians don't ascribe any guilt to Jesus. Thus, his divinity cannot rest on the same process as mythic deifications. So this is what differentiates Christ. Christ is innocent. He's innocent before he becomes a scapegoat. He's innocent after. And then let's not forget about the power of the resurrection, and he really underlines it here. The resurrection is not only a miracle, a prodigious transgression of natural laws. It is the spectacular sign of the entrance into the world of a power superior to violent contagion. By contrast to the latter, it is a power not at all hallucinatory or deceptive. It's important to understand that this the myths of victimhood that arise are hallucinatory and deceptive. The victim was innocent, for example, or they had some sort of, they didn't deserve to die, or some sort of lie that is embedded within the myth as well. Far from deceiving his disciples, it enables them to recognize what they had not recognized before and to reproach themselves for their pathetic flight in the preceding days.
This is why the person of Christ has to be properly seen as that person who avoids, at least in Girardian terms, two temptations. One is sexual desire, and the second one is to respond with violence to violence. So the ethics of non-violence in the person of Jesus, on the one hand, these suspensions, this bracketing of violence, and secondly, the fact that he doesn't actually involve himself in the economy of sexual desire. That kind of radical decision, which is very different from what you see in the life of the so-called Prophet Muhammad. Okay, with all due respect to Muslim people who might listen to this conversation, there's a huge difference there between Christ, who doesn't enter the economy of sexual desire, and Maximus the Confessor has many things to say. That's why Christ is the new Adam, for instance. Yes, and Adam was not necessarily construed by God as a sexual agent. Anyway, I'm not trying to say sexuality is negative. I'm just saying that sexuality is dangerous. Not necessarily intrinsically negative, is dangerous. That's why the teenage girls don't understand what they are up to when they desire the same man. Because you can duplicate an item, you can duplicate a Ferrari, you can duplicate a hat or a piece of clothing, but you cannot duplicate the same superstar. So when two girls in Hollywood go for the same man, disaster is just around the corner.
Yes. I mean, it's important to note that Christ and the Gospels reveal basically the way this mechanism works. And it not just reveals it, because it's one thing to just reveal it, but not to solve it. It solves it. It solves the mimetic crisis. There are three separate phases of the mimetic cycle, and that's collective violence. So it starts with desiring the desire of another. That snowballs. This mimetic rivalry snowballs, and it eventually ends in mimetic violence. This crisis, collective violence, and then sacred revelation. These are the three cycles that Girard talks about in the mimetic cycle. We have a crisis. So look, for example, we have a crisis on our hands. We have a crisis on our hands in Ukraine. We can look at modern day scapegoats. We have a crisis on our hand in Ukraine. What will it end with? What is history telling us eventually will happen? There is collective violence, and then sacred revelation. To the victor belongs the spoils, as they say, or the victors are the ones that write history. Eventually, the people that create the myths, the sacred myths that societies are born out of, are the ones that claim the victory. Right? The history is very seldomly written from the standpoint of the victim. So I just put some examples here of modern day scapegoats, and we have Djokovic, who's become now the face of the anti-vax movement, right? Or someone who has challenged these very strict laws in Australia. We have the migrant crisis, and migrants make excellent scapegoats, oftentimes blamed for the ills of society or some sort of moral failing, or whether it's or economic turmoil. We have the Ukrainians now. I mean, if we look at the conflict in Ukraine, for example, who are the real rivals here?
NATO and Russia.
That's right. But NATO and Russia are fighting for power. They chose this ground zero to be the Ukrainians, right? Who have very little power to defend themselves without the help of
who are divided by themselves. So they are divided within themselves. They are not a united body themselves. That's the drama of Ukraine. Half of it looks to the west, half of it looks towards east.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I want to give time, Mihai, for conversation as well. I'm just going to move through the next example. This is a cinematic example. So most of you probably have seen the movie The Godfather. This is a very famous scene from The Godfather, which explains how this is obviously a story of a family, but it's also the story of organized crime and Michael Corleone building his empire. And at the end, this is the famous scene of the baptism, where he builds his own empire, and he does it with a foundational violence. So here you can see and how Coppola, who's a Catholic, obviously, imbues this with religious overtones. Hopefully you can hear it. Audio's good?
Good.
Exia Deo, e munde Spiritus et da locum Spiritui Sancto Paraclito. Oremus, preces nostus, per Christum Domine nostrum. Amen. Michael, Crucis Domini din impresione signatum, od magnitudines gloria tua rudimenta servans, pe custodia mandatorum tuorum, ad regenerationis gloriam pervenire meriatum, pe quiendum Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen. Oremus omnipotens sempiterne Deus, Pater Domini nostri Iesu Christi respice dignatus super hanc fambulum tuum Michael, qui venturis est judicari vivus et mortus in saeculum perennium. Amen. Michael, accipe sal sapiense propitiasse si tibi in vitam aeternam. Amen. Deus omnipotens Pater Domini nostri Iesu Christi, qui Dei regenerabit aquae Spiritus Sancto, qui de tebi tibi remissionem omnia peccatorum, iste te lineat Chrisma te salutis in eiodum Christo Iesu Domini nostrum, in vitam aeternam. Amen. Ego te lineolio salutis in Christo Iesu Domini nostrum, rabias vitam aeternam. Amen. Credes in Spiritum Sanctum, Sanctam Ecclesiam Catholicam, Sanctorum Communionem Remissionem Peccatorum, carnes resurrectionem et vitam aeternam. Credo.
Exercise te mundi Spiritus in nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Ut exias et recedes ab hoc famulum Dei Michaeli, isierim tibi impere maledictit damnata. Effrata quores ad aperire, et adorum suavitatis, tuatum effulgar diabli apocum guabeneum judicium Dei. Michael, do you believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth?
I do.
Do you believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord?
I do.
Do you believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church?
I do.
Pater nostri qui es in caelo, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitte nobis debita nostrum, sicut in nos limitibus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. Michael, ingredere in templum Dei, ut habeas patem cum Christo in vitam aeternam. Amen. Credo in Deo Pater omnipotens, Creatorem caeli et terrae, et in Iesum Christum Filii eius unigenitum Dominum nostrum, qui conceptus est de Spiritus Sancto, natus ex Maria Virgin, passus sub Pontius Pilatus, crucifixus mortus et sepultus, descender ad inferos, tertia die resurrexer ad mortis, ascender ad caelos, seder ad dextra Dei Patris omnipotens, inde venturis est judicare vivus et mortus. Credo in Spiritus Sancto, Sanctam Ecclesiam Catholicam, Sanctorum Communionem, Remissionem Peccatorum, Canus Resurrectionem, Vitam Aeternam. Amen.
Michael Francis Rizzi, do you renounce Satan?
I do renounce him.
And all his works?
I do renounce them.
And all his pomps?
I do renounce them.
Michael Rizzi, will you be baptized?
I will.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Michael Rizzi, go in peace, and may the Lord be with you. Amen.
So, as you can see there, in The Godfather, oh, sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Can you? Yeah, okay, good. Sorry, I wanted to stop that. The baptism by violence and the baptism the birth of Michael Corleone in the film as a gangster. You know, if you've watched the whole movie, you know that he comes into it as somebody that doesn't want to have anything to do with the family business, but then is pulled into the cycle of violence because he wants to avenge his father. So there's this concept of vendetta and revenge also that is very, very intrinsic to this idea of mimetic rivalry and you know, the idea of wanting to avenge the victim, the cycle of violence that continues when rights have not been wrong, when wrongs have not been righted, and so on. And that's, of course, you can see the religious symbols there also in The Godfather with the renunciation of Satan and all his works, and he says yes. It's the belief of the collective violence or the group that is causing the violence, that they're doing the right thing. So it's important to know that the people who are involved in corrective violence, they lose sense of what is right and what is wrong, because in their mind they're doing the right thing. They're doing the work of God. You know,
you have the tension in Coppola. You have the tension between two communities. It's the church. It's the community of peace. And then it's the world, which is the community of violence and death. And I think that's striking in the passage you've just shown us, the contrast between a Christ-like world of peace, of love, of solidarity, and the division which violence and the devil brings always, the enmity among brothers and sisters, the resentment between Cain and Abel. That's shocking, and that's what's happening. Yeah. So the family here is also, I think, a metaphor for the nation. Sicily was a bone of contention between the North and the South, just like we have a contention now between Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine, right? Who should protect these Ukrainians? And Putin is happy to protect them, like a good godfather. And he could also baptize them. Even the Greek Catholics could be baptized into the Orthodox waters if that's necessary. I'm sure about that. Yeah. Anyway, it's striking. I mean, very good example, Daniel. Thank you. I must say that in like 10 minutes, I will have to go in order to comment for a Romanian television precisely this conflict. But I'm very happy to stay with you for like 10 or 12 more minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think because we are getting close to the end of our session here, I think we should have some conversation around these topics. So I welcome from the audience maybe some comments, some questions.
Let's encourage our friends. Yeah. To first of all start like turn on their video camera perhaps, and also start the conversation with our very special guest. Daniel, this was fantastic. And I must say
just a primer.
Yeah.
Just a primer on Girard. I hope that you all can read The Scapegoat. Also, I See Satan Fall Like Lightning is a very good book that speaks to the victory of the cross over the mimetic cycle and the cycle of violence. How does it end?
The cross brings an end to the desire, no? When you allow yourself to be crucified, when you crucify your desires and your passions, then you are the seat of God's blessing. You're the place where the blessing of God can begin to flourish. Guys, who wants to ask the first question? Or maybe you can just drop your questions in the chat rubric.
You know, one thing that I want to ask the audience is, when do you know that you are caught up in a mimetic cycle? How do you know that? How do you recognize that you are part of the cycle of violence, or you're wrapped into this? Because we all are. You know, mimetic rivalry is not just interpersonal; it's societal. It can be global in scale. How do you know that you're caught up in it? How do you recognize it?
When you begin to desire something which cannot be shared, is that the beginning of the vicious cycle?
Yeah.
Like a unique position. There's only one, as you rightly put it, there's only one room for the president of the United States. And if all your desire, if all your energy is driven towards that specific goal, if your entire life depends on whether you get it or not, then you might be caught in that mimetic desire. Well, if you begin just to say, God willing, I will become president, if you begin to accept that you might not become a president and still be at peace with yourself, you might extract yourself from the cycle of violence. Am I right?
Yeah, I think it's one also good chapter of reference from the Passion is the denial of Peter's denial of Christ. If you look at the way he's being pulled in, and Girard really paints a really beautiful picture of it in chapter 12 of the Scapegoat, is when Peter is attracted to the fire and becomes part of the mimetic cycle that Jesus is now about to become the scapegoat, and beautifully describing the fire that welcomes Peter to be warmed. And in the light of that fire, he's recognized by the others and immediately attacked. And the first thing he says, I don't know him. I haven't been with him. Right? He goes into this, what Girard says, he is dispossessed and destitute, reduced to a vegetable-like existence, controlled by elemental reflexes. I think when we become like cattle, in a sense, when you stop when you become kind of like a vegetable in society, when you begin to mimic what everybody else is doing, is when you start to realize, when you're truly part of like the echo chamber, right? That's a warning sign. And I think that those warning signs are becoming dulled for us these days. We fail to recognize when we're part of the system, you know? I mean, look, what's happened in the last 2 years has what some people call, you know, a great social experiment, is for all of us to comply, right? To comply with rules, regulations, even if they don't make sense. Even if logic, you know, even if logically speaking, you have to, you know, I never get the point of going into a restaurant with a mask on, but then taking your mask while you're eating, right? Walking around the restaurant with the mask, then taking it off as you're walking around and sitting down at the table. A lot of things that society forces us to comply with, to just fall in line with. And what do you think about that? I mean, going back to Peter and his denial, he is lulled into the crowd to warm himself by the fire, and that's where the denial happens. That's where he becomes part of the cycle. Anybody have any thoughts about that?
You know, my people are very shy tonight. I don't know why. We have to find a mechanism to. Okay, so Teodora Camelia Vaschi from Oradea, please, Teodora.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
Thank you very much for this discourse. It was very, very, very beautiful. I would want to quote Davila Gomez. We just studied very recently at this club. He said, "We often come to be ashamed that we embraced a collective enthusiasm." And I would want to ask, how can we escape going with the crowd? And how can we not make scapegoats? is anybody guilty of anything, or is just the evil within us?
One thing that I like about your comment, Theodora, is that you brought up the concept of shame, and I think that's very illuminating to this idea of crowd behavior, because what the crowd wants to do is to shame you into submission. And if you look at Peter and Peter's denial of Christ, there is an element of shame there. I'm going to just use Girard here. And there's fear, right? Fear and shame, and they're related. No doubt there is fear at the origin of the denial, but there is also shame. Like Peter's arrogance somewhat earlier, shame is a mimetic sentiment. In fact, the most mimetic of sentiments. So shame has a, as Girard is saying, this shame has a way of snowballing. There's a collective shame that we all buy into. To experience, I must look at myself through the eyes of whoever makes me feel ashamed. This requires intense imagination, which is the same as servile imagination or servile imitation. Imagine and imitate are in fact one and the same term. Peter is ashamed of this Jesus, whom all the world despises, ashamed of the model he chose, and therefore, and this is the key, ashamed of himself. Ashamed of Jesus, ashamed of the model, and then ashamed of himself. What's happening here with the denial is the shame of Peter until he basically, by denying Christ, he's also denying himself. He's denying who he is, the identity which Christ gave him as a disciple. That's what the cycle of mimetic rivalry wants you to end at. To deny who you are, to forget who you are, to forget your identity, and adopt instead the identity of the group, of the crowd. And that's what Peter's trying to do. He's trying to identify himself with the people warming themselves by the fire. I'm one of you. And then, his accent gives him away, right? Oh, you're a Galilean. You're not really one of us. And I think at the end of the day, it is actually an attack. It's the collective attack on individual identity. I mean, here we can talk about individualism and the idea of individual rights versus group rights. All of this has to do with that. And as Mihai said, the attack on human personhood, very good. So it has a lot to do with shame, making you feel ashamed of your beliefs, ashamed of your lifestyle, ashamed of who you are.
Ashamed of your God as well.
Ashamed of your God, very important. Ashamed of Jesus, because that's important with Peter. Ashamed of identity. And
also, may I say something? What's striking in Girard is the fact that he's showing us the realism of the Gospels, right? The very stark psychological realism. The Gospels are not painting Peter in a way in which he looks like impeccable, right? That fact that Peter denied Christ can relate with some of us at least, right? Because in a way, whenever we commit sin, we all deny Christ. We deny his power over us. We deny his lordship over our lives. We deny the fact that God is truly providential and he will take care of us whenever we try to become like the crowd. So the Gospels are truly impressive in this aspect, especially when they reveal the realism of these interactions between Jesus' disciples and the world. Yeah.
And that's precisely because none of us want to be crucified, right, Mihai? I mean, it's much easier to participate in the crucifixion than to be crucified yourself. So the risk of Peter being crucified along with Christ is very high, right? So his safety value, or he values his security and his identification with the crowd at that point. You see, Peter hasn't fully fulfilled his journey yet, hasn't finished his journey. But yeah, the best way not to be crucified in the final analysis is to do as everyone does and join in the crucifixion.
Exactly. Very good point. Who else?
So again, mimicking the crowd.
I would also say something at the end. So the triangle, the image of the triangle. So Christ is encountering this woman, the adulterous woman, the sinful woman, and everybody in the name of the word or the Torah or the scriptures or the law, they want to kill her, right? She has committed numerous sins, repeated adulteries, and everybody wants to stone that specific woman. So you have a triangle. You have Jesus, the judge, you have the sinful woman, and then you have the crowd. And the crowd wants to lapidate. I like this word because it comes from the Latin lapis.
Yes.
But it's not the philosophical stone they are trying to throw, right? It's that very Palestinian stone, which is still there, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to use this word. Anyway, the Palestine comes from the Philistines. Anyway, coming back. So you have the crowd, and Christ with the word can shut up the crowd, the voice of the crowd. But why? Because he's, first of all, authentic, but he is the truth. And he's asking with the art of questioning. Yeah, he's asking the most difficult question, the Parsifal's question, right? So who among you is sinless? Okay, she has committed sin for sure. But who among you is sinless? Yes. So what is the weight of your righteousness? How can you pretend to be righteous yourselves when you have committed sins in your heart, in your mind, in your imagination, perhaps equally bad or even worse sins than the ones committed by the woman? And that point, that moment when the singularities, the individuality of the woman is somehow baptized in this second chance that she receives in the waters of grace that she's encountering through Jesus. That moment is truly unique. And I think this is what we also have to insist, right? That there is a chance that you can get a second chance, maybe even a third chance you can get in Christ, if you recognize the truth.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the concept or the picture of the collective arrogance of the crowd. It's interesting that when people get together, their morality seems to be more sharper than individual morality. There are more gray areas with the individual, for example, than when a crowd gets together. Somehow they immediately figure out what's right and what's wrong much more quickly than an individual does. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed how, for example, I mean, a jury of your peers, the reason that the whole judicial court system here, you need to be, judge jury of your peers, and they reach a verdict, and the 12 of them get together, and so on. The collective morality versus individual morality.
Yes.
How people immediately know what's right and what's wrong when they get together, versus when you are left to decide by yourself, to struggle with the gray areas, collective judgment. And so then Jesus calls their bluff and their brazen arrogance and uncovers the fact that they are, as they say, mormita varita, white sepulchres, you are nothing more than hypocrites. And only a blameless person can do that, and that's who Jesus was. For many years, I've often erroneously used the example of Jesus going into the temples and turning over the tables, and I kind of excused myself with that example for being combative. Well, Jesus was also combative. One thing we tend to forget is that Jesus was without sin. So as someone without sin, he had every right to be combative. And so that's the difference between us and Jesus. When we try to do justice by being combative, we need to remember of our own sin and that we are, we're not perfect ourselves.
And if our body is our temple, I'm wondering how often do we want to clean our own temple, before we try to clean the physical temple of a church or a political party. Yes, it's always easier to spot the sins of others. Guys, I have to go. I'm really sorry, but please stay with Daniel. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mihai. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.